Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than tullymodels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at tullymodels.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on this show, Tim Garland. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. Been looking to get you on the show for a little bit here. Finally, glad we were able to connect and be able to have this chat. Been checking out your Seaboard Central YouTube channel and all the great videos you're doing there, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But I think you're going to have a pretty cool story to tell us with the Seaboard Central. And as I mentioned to you in the pre-show, I love interviewing freelance railroaders because they always have a story to tell, usually the one they've created. And I always love hearing the backstory to that. So yeah, we will definitely roll into that.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to telling it.
Awesome. Well, let's start in the beginning. Tell me how you got started in the hobby.
Oh, wow. It goes, I'm one of those kids that got bit by the train bug at a very early age. Of course, I loved all kinds of transportation, cars, trucks, heavy construction equipment, airplanes, boats. But trains bit me pretty hard when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. I can remember as a small child going to my grandparents' house that lived next to the L&N line that ran between Atlanta and Etowah, Tennessee. And I can remember in the mid-'70s, the F units with their Mars lights and seeing them in the nighttime. And I was just telling my dad to slow down because the road was right parallel to the tracks. And I'm like, wanting him to pace the train. So as a 5-year-old, I'm wanting him to pace this train that I thought was amazing. So I knew I always loved trains. Didn't get into model trains. I think my first model train set was a 6-year-old kid. I got the Tyco Chattanooga Choo-Choo train set, little oval 8. I remember it because it had a crane and a tender, and I thought that was awesome to get. Of course, I think a lot of people back in the 70s, early 80s started out with something like a Tyco or a Bachmann train set.
I started with the same set. Yeah, the Chattanooga
Choo-Choo. And
that's right.
I can remember actually visiting the Chattanooga Choo-Choo many times as a 8, 9, 10-year-old every year because I grew up in Cartersville, Georgia, and so Chattanooga is maybe about an hour and 15-minute drive from there. And going to the original Chattanooga Choo-Choo train station. And at the time, they had this huge model railroad that was in the freight side of the station. And I think the thing was like 200 feet long. And so it was a club that had a layout. And it depicted Chattanooga and Lookout Mountain and had a lot of trains running on loops that just all over the place. And I can just remember being so fascinated with seeing all these model trains going. As I continued the only kind of trains I knew about was Tycos, things like that, Bachmann and Tyco. I had something like a Silver Streak and a Golden Eagle, and the lead truck was powered, and it only pulled 6 or 7 cars if you were lucky. And I remember these were just fantasy schemes. I didn't see what I was actually looking at when I looked at the prototype. Where's the L&N, the family lines, the Seaboard system, the things I grew up seeing. And then when I went to Chattanooga Choo Choo, here they have those kind of trains running, Southern Railway, at Tuxedo, Atlas SD24s. And I never had seen any model trains of real trains. And I'm like, where can I find trains like this? And so one of the guys that was a member of the club there, I talked to him and I said, where can I find a train like this? And he told me at that time, you need to get an Atlas locomotive because we run this layout 365 days a year, and we have to have something that's dependable. So they had a lot of Atlas SD24s, SD35s, GP38s that were running around the layout. And so my father is in the military, he's in the Air Force, and so there was an Air Force Base in Dobbins Air Force Base in Marietta, Georgia. And he found a hobby shop that was close to the Air Force Base called Crescent Hobbies. And he took me there, and I was blown away the first time I ever went into a hobby shop and seeing all the locomotives in the glass case. And here were locomotives with paint schemes that I've seen in real life. The first time I'd ever seen a L&N engine or a Seaboard Coastline engine or a Southern Railway engine. And I didn't know anything about Athearn. All the Athearn blue boxes were there. And all I knew was I needed to find an Atlas locomotive. And so I asked the hobby shop owner, I said, I need an Atlas engine. That's what I've been told is a really great engine. And he had an Atlas FP7A in Seaboard Coastline paint. And he told me this engine is so strong it'll pull 24 passenger cars by itself. And I'm thinking, I can only pull 6 cars with my Tycos. This must be an amazing locomotive if it can pull 24 passenger cars. And so what little money I had, I spent on that. That was the first real locomotive I got. And I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I can remember that particular Christmas being the best Christmas ever because all I asked for from my father, my mother, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles is I just wanted these model trains that I saw in this train store. And that train store had all of the cars on a shelf with like cellophane where you could see what was inside the box,
Yeah.
And it was all on the wall. And so they just grabbed a bunch of cars with no rhyme or reason. I had everything from a modern, at the time, 50-foot box car to a milk box car, milk car. Heinz pickle car. I didn't care, I'm 10 years old, but it was just getting those engines. And I got my first Athearn engines. I think they were U28Bs, something like that. Got a 4x8 sheet of plywood and an oval track and away I went. And I started, that was probably my first model railroad I ever had was on that 4x8 sheet of plywood in my parents' laundry room of all places. So
that's about your preteen age there when you start
anywhere between 10 to 12 years old, probably around 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of the lifelike accessories, the little log loader and the little gravel pit. I thought that was really cool. Had I'll never forget, I had a Maxwell House whistle. You press the button and the whistle would come out of it was a billboard, but it had a little thing, made the whistle noise. And I thought, well, that's cool and all, but that's a whistle. It's not a horn. I'm running the diesels. I didn't have a steam.
Right.
The Chattanooga Choo Choo train from when I was 7, I don't even think it ran at that time. So I'm like, I need a diesel horn. And I think they ended up finding a little fuel tank, like a Shell oil tank that had a horn in it. And that was my first taste of sound, way before what we have today, which is amazing to me.
I sure hope Tony Cook tunes in and listens to all of this Tyco talk because he's just going to get so excited hearing it. And I'm excited hearing it because I remember all this stuff. I had that Maxwell House whistle and obviously the Chattanooga Choo Choo. And and I didn't really know the difference either. It was whatever came from the local store called Benny's that my mom worked at. It was kind of like your home auto, pretty much everything, toys, everything in one little store. And,
Right.
that was the only influence. But man, when you find a hobby shop like you did and you start to see, kind of that next level stuff and you get that idea, boy, that can really start to kick off a model railroading hobby.
Well, you can see because we're the same generation, the Gen X generation. So we grew up, our first train set was more than likely a Tyco or a Bachmann, where my father's generation, it was Lionel or some kind of 10 plate train set, because he gave me his old Lionel train set when I was 3 years old. And I got on afterwards. I said, Dad, why did you do that? Why did you give me the train at 3 years old? You knew I would break it and tear it up. That train would be worth something today had you just held on to it and said, wait, so I have a Bachmann train set that I got from work because I've worked for the railroad. And when Wick Moorman was our president and CEO, he was a model railroader. And probably people didn't know that, but I knew it because I met him one time and he told me in a meeting that he had them. And one year he gave everybody in the whole company a Bachmann train set with a Norfolk Southern train set. And so I kept it to this day, and I plan on giving it to my grandson, one of my grandsons who might be interested in it. But I'm going to wait. I'm going to be smart enough to wait until they're 8 or 9 years old or 10, to where they won't break the thing the first chance they get at it.
Well, that's really cool. So you're mentioning that you've become a railroader, and I'm kind of curious about 10 or 11. You got into the model railroading hobby, but how about rail fanning?
Well, when I first turned 16, I had my first truck. I did a lot of rail fanning in Cartersville. Cartersville had a junction where you had the Atlanta-Chattanooga main line, the old NC and St. L line. They ran out of Chattanooga, came in and at Cartersville, went to Atlanta, and you also had the old Knoxville and Atlanta line, the L&N line that came through there. So they met there in Cartersville, and so a lot of trains operated Cartersville south. So I would pace the trains as a 16-year-old. I documented. I made had the old big camcorder, would go out and film the trains out in the yard. And this would have been 1986. So a lot of family lines, Seaboard System action. You could still every now and then see an engine, maybe an SCL paint or L&N paint, but very rare. Most of it was Seaboard System and family lines. And then the CSX started showing up, and I saw the first rendition of the CSX paint schemes. So I did that. Yeah, I did that. I never did go over to the southern side because that was a little farther than I would travel to see the Southerns or the Norfolk Southern engines. But I did visit some of the short lines that was close by to get to see those. That was Georgia Northeastern, which my friend Thomas Komoski models. I got to see their line. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Again, I say it quite often about catching the golden era of railroading, and you definitely caught somebody's golden era being able to see all those, the Seaboard and the L&N, and seeing those in action. And now some of us, younger folk or whatnot, they only get to see it in a CSX heritage unit now, and you get to see the real thing.
And it was very colorful because I can remember right after the merger when CSX. This is the first time I ever saw a chassis system locomotive show up. And I'd only seen them in the books, books or magazines. And here was a true to life chassis system running. So I was just amazed by that. So it was a very colorful era to see all these. And there were the SD 40-2s. I can remember rail fanning and seeing a quartet of baby boats, U-18Bs, switching on a train, on a local, and you really take things for granted when everything today is they've pretty much settled on a couple of models, locomotive models, and that's about it. Where we used to see SD40-2 lash-ups, C30-7 lash-ups, the things that were really, really fun to watch.
Yeah, it was a lot more diverse, wasn't it? Versus like today, even when there are different models out there, other than some what seems like subtle details, they're kind of all the same looking. But when you get a, U18
Right.
and you get a SD40 and you start seeing, there's massive differences. There's, a lot of variety and
Right.
power, which is definitely neat to see.
Well, most of the people that watch the Seaboard Central and know about the Seaboard know that I'm a locomotive engineer. And I choose to work a local job. One, because it affords me, I have the seniority, I can be home every night and have 2 days off a week where I can spend more time working on the Seaboard Central. But two, I also get to still run the second generation EMDs, and that's what I operated today, a GP38-2 and an SD40-2. They're not on the main line anymore, but they're still found in the yards, and I could still use those, which I'd much prefer to switch with than these big brutes that are what I call road hogs.
Yeah.
They're great for the road. They're comfortable, got comfortable cabs, but they're not designed to switch cars and yards. So
yeah.
So I still get a chance to enjoy my generation's locomotives.
Which is very cool stuff that, you got to see, and, now you're getting to operate it as an engineer. Really, really cool opportunity. Mm-hmm. So let's talk how you get there. 16 years old, you're doing this rail fanning, you're getting to see all this cool stuff. As you're starting to rail fan more, and does operations start to enter the equation yet, or does that happen down the road a bit?
Well, I think I've always been I've considered myself an operator more so than a rail fan. I always studied railroading. So I subscribed to like Trains magazine at an early age and would learn all about these different railroads all over the United States. Especially my favorite railroads have always been the regional railroads. I enjoy reading about successful short lines, but not the big class ones, but the regional size railroads that's a little bit larger than a short line, but not enormous like a class one, still has that personality. And I've always found those fascinated. But I did not decide that I wanted to work for the railroad until I was maybe 14 years old. A friend of ours, my parents that went to our church, was a conductor for Norfolk Southern. They would come to the house and he would see my 4x8 sheet layout that I had in the basement. And so he knew I loved trains, and he decided he asked me one day if I wanted to go for a ride on a real locomotive.
Wow.
Of course.
Yeah,
who wouldn't?
Right.
I'm 13 years old. Of course I would.
Absolutely.
And so he took me to Dalton, Georgia, and unbeknownst to me, the engine that was assigned to work that yard is now preserved at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, and it is the TAG 80 engine. They repainted it in the original blue TAG 80 colors, but at the time I got to be on it, it was in the Southern Railway tuxedo scheme. And I thought it was different because it had somebody's name written on it, and I had never seen anyone's name written on the side of a diesel locomotive. But this one was dedicated to a former TAG vice president, John Chambliss. And so while I was riding, oh man, I had a smile a mile wide.
I bet.
While I'm riding with this crew on this train, and the engineer asked me, he said, "Well, you want to run the engine?" Of course I did.
Oh,
so he set me in the seat, and I'll never forget, we had it was an engine. It was pulling one insulated boxcar we'd pulled from the customer, and we were taking it back to the yard. So he told me what to do. He told me everything to do, and I did it. And it was right then and there I said, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a locomotive engineer.
Oh, so awesome.
And it's funny because everybody that I grew up with all knew how crazy I was about trains and wanting to work for the railroad. And I went to my 25th high school reunion And they told me, a number of them told me, said, Tim, you're the only person I've ever met that said what they wanted to do at 13 or 14 years old, and you did it.
Yeah.
You actually did what you wanted to do, your dream. So, and it took me to, I first worked for a short line in back around 1990, 1991. I was working for a short line railroad, and then I ended up working for an intermodal contractor for about 4 years, and I ran the big piggy packers where they loaded the containers in the well cars and the trailers on the flat cars with a giant crane.
Cool.
And Norfolk Southern was hiring for conductors, and in 1996, that's when I became a conductor for Norfolk Southern. By April of 2000, I was a qualified engineer.
Awesome.
So I've been a locomotive engineer ever since. It's been a good job, a rewarding job. It's been challenging at times. I've run everything from 12,000-foot monster intermodal trains to 5-car locals. Everything in between, from small engines to SD90s. I've done them all. I've tell people that my day job is just research for my model railroad. That's the way I look at it. So I try to observe everything around, whether it's weathering on the cars or how the track looks or the vegetation around the right of way, to operations, how the railroad is being operated, and I try to incorporate that into my modeling, into my layout, because my goal has always been for the Seaboard Central to make it believable, where
Right.
people would think that could be a real railroad. And so I try to look at what the prototype does and how the prototype does it, and incorporate those things into the Seaboard Central.
I'm going to ask you, because you're one of the few that have confessed here on the podcast to actually being a railroader and model railroading at the same time. And I know I've asked the question before, but again, to you, how do you keep the mix like exciting? Because for my full-time job and the full-time jobs I've done before, I can't envision doing them also as a hobby. Like, how does that work for you?
Right.
How do you keep yourself excited to keep doing the model railroading?
Well, that's a good question. For me, I could see that if I was in the model railroad industry. If all I did every day was work in a hobby shop or work for a model railroad manufacturer or the magazine or something like that, if that's all I did every day, I could kind of see where, all right, when I come home, I don't want to think about it. But the real railroad, it's a job. It's of course, everybody has jobs when they're tired and they're exhausted, and a hobby's a hobby. You do it when if you don't feel like doing it, you don't do it. But for me, I look at the hobby as a big stress reliever. For me, it's great medicine, especially it helps you to escape from everything else that's going on in life, be it whatever.
I agree.
It helped me through a divorce.
Yeah.
It's helped me through hard times, and it allowed me to access the creative side of my brain and focus on what I was doing. And it's I love it. I wouldn't, as long as I live, I know there's a lot of people that they step away from the hobby at certain ages and then come back to it later. I never did. I may have slowed down a little, like when I was maybe 19, 20 years old, living in an apartment, but I still had some kind of a little layout. Even if at one time I was in an apartment and all I had was 4 milk crates with a 1x12 or 1x8 sheet of lumber, but I had a little switching layout where I could run right next to my bed. I could run a train back and forth because it was a relief. It was a relief valve.
Right.
And at the same time, I would still visit hobby shops and collect things because I knew I wasn't always going to be in an apartment. I would eventually get married or find a house or buy a house or whatever and start a new layout. And that came eventually, but I've always been doing something with model railroading my whole entire life.
I think you hit on something really big there. And it reminds me of the interview we did with Michael Gross. And he made the statement that art is a form of protest. And I think you're kind of hitting on that same idea that when you start with the model railroad, it's a protest. It's also that escape that you talked about. And it's probably why, like, when I even walk into model railroad shops, the escape starts when I walk through the door. And when I hear people in the aisleways and they start talking politics, or they start talking, it's like, I turn around and say, hey, let's not talk about it here. This is like safe haven area. Right. And even if they're saying stuff that I agree with, I still don't want to hear it. I want to escape from the world. And whether it be a hobby shop or your own layout, or it really is a beautiful thing that you get to go down there, you get to be the boss, and you get to protest, and you get to do all these things outside of the world into your own little cocoon.
Right. And you're focused on what you're trying to achieve. I tell people, you get that vision in your mind of what you're wanting to create.
Yeah.
And that's what an artist does. And I've explained to people like I work with, like they have asked me, why are you a model railroader? Why do you want to think about trains away from work?
Yeah.
And I was a rail fan at 16, but now I'm not a rail fan anymore. I see the large stuff every day. The only thing that interests me would be going to see a steam locomotive. Now that would be interesting because that's not something I see every day.
Right.
Amazed by steam engines, but diesels and freight cars, I see them every day. So I'm not going to be the rail fan out there chasing trains and taking photographs unless it's for the model railroad and it's research that I need to use to weather a particular locomotive or a car. I get my excitement from the model railroad because I look at it and I tell people, well, for me, it's 3D art.
Right.
Some people, artists, 2D art. Well, this is just because you're having to think a lot like an artist. Especially one of the best parts of the hobby I enjoy is scenery. And so it's a lot of layers, the same way a painter would. They would start at the back and work their way to the front. And it's the same way when we're modeling a particular scene. It's just layer upon layer upon layer, and you're having to think about it. And there's no right or wrong way because everybody's approach is different. It's just whatever you're satisfied with. Now, what my particular satisfaction level may be different from someone else's.
Sure.
Is what you're happy with. And that's what's great about this hobby. And I'll tell people all the time, I'm never afraid to rip something out and start over again if I'm not satisfied with something. And so over the years, I've had a lot of layouts. And I've always thought about what could I do differently if I start over again. And so a lot of people I've talked to are reluctant to redo a layout, or I've already got everything down. And I said, well, you really don't have any scenery. You have track work and wiring. You don't even have ballast down. It's not that hard to change something if you're not satisfied, because you want, like you said, you want to continue to be excited about it. Because if you're not excited about it, you're going to be more reluctant to go downstairs to the basement or out to the garage or up to the attic or whatever to work on your layout, because you've lost that excitement. So you always have to keep things fresh and exciting. And if it's not doing it for you, don't be afraid to start again.
Yeah, especially if the flywheel stops turning, if it's to a point where you're just, like you said, you've thrown it down and you just don't want to go down to the layout or work on it anymore. Yeah, it's time.
Right.
It's time to make a change and figure out what you really love. And I think you really did a great job of it. And it sounds like as you're hinting at your progression of building model railroads right from when you were in that apartment at 19 or 20 years old and you had a little switching layout, you still kind of kept with it, but it's also a great place to start and kind of work your way towards bigger layouts.
Right. One of the things my mother has done for me since probably 1982, I think, is every year for Christmas, she's always given me a subscription to Model Railroader. And so I've always would study what everybody else was doing, read about it. So over the years, I learned so much that way, even when I was reluctant about doing something. So as I told you before, a lot of the layouts I had in the early ages were just the plywood Pacific stage. I went away from the 4x8 sheet to a switching layout at an early age. I can remember cutting that 4x8 sheet up and making an L-shaped layout in my bedroom. I became an operator at an early age. I tell people, you have three different kinds of model railroaders. You have collectors, you have rail fans, and you have operators. Of course, a lot of people fall into the collectors category where you collect more than what you'll ever use. And they'll sit in boxes for years. And then a lot of people just want to see the trains run. And they're just want to look at it from the rail fan point of view. But me, I've always enjoyed the switching operations, and it doesn't have to go on a loop-to-loop to satisfy me. I want it to have a purpose, and I try to think about when I design the layout, I want to design it as if it was a real railroad and how it would operate.
Was that something that you kind of figured out on your own, or was there some influence from all those model railroader magazines about doing more point to point, or maybe a combination of the two?
I'm not really sure. Probably the looking at the magazines and when I was rail fanning too, and looking at the prototype and how tracks were arranged. Early on, I wanted to model the Clinchfield Railroad. I had a great book called Clinchfield Country, and so that was what I wanted to do. Is I looked at how the Clinchfield was, and until I started seeing layouts like Alan McClellan's Virginian and Ohio, and Tony Custer's Allegheny Midland. The biggest influence for the Seaboard Central of all time has been Eric Bruman's Utah Belt. And when that started showing up, that railroad started showing up in Railroad Model Craftsman and Model Railroader, I knew I was just fascinated with how a freelance railroad could seem so real. I would say that's probably I even like Bruce Chubb's Sunset Valley, but it's hard to say if it was Alan McClellan's V&O, but more than likely it was Eric Bruman's Utah Belt is what made me decide I needed to come up with my own freelance railroad. And so I started studying areas around me where I could make something that was believable. And like I said, I've studied prototypes by looking at what was going on at the time. And at the time, there was a lot of consolidation going on, and railroads got into downsizing. And it was sad to me that one of the lines that CSX decided to abandon was a line between Atlanta and Birmingham, Alabama. And I saw this line, and they were going to start ripping up tracks, and now a lot of it is called the Silver Comet Trail. It became a trail for people to walk on. And I thought, why in the world is a railroad ripping up their tracks? Do they not have the business to justify the rail line? And so I started looking at this, and I started putting things together, and I noticed that wasn't the only one. There was a lot of them where the line only went so far and was rail banked. It used to connect and continue on. And so I said, you know what? I think I can come up with my own railroad that would take over these lines, these secondary lines that were going either rail banked or being removed. And so I started piecing them together, and I found out that most of them were former Seaboard coastline tracks and Central of Georgia tracks. And around the same time, Model Railroader had a special issue of a line that they created called the Seaboard Central. I don't know if anybody remembers that. I think that was like 1989, maybe. They came out with it in a December and January issue where they did a project layout. And I thought, wow, that would be the perfect name for the railroad that I'm creating, because I'm encompassing both the Seaboard coastline tracks and Central of Georgia tracks. So I put them together, Seaboard Central.
There you go.
It just made sense.
Yeah.
So I decided, well, here's the line. It makes sense to have this line that comes out of Birmingham, Alabama, over the old Seaboard coastline to Cedartown, Georgia, then connects with the Central Georgia trackage all the way to Macon, and then Macon, it hits again on Seaboard coastline trackage to Savannah. So there's the line, Birmingham, Alabama to Savannah, Georgia. And that's how the Seaboard Central became. And I decided, well, it's going to be a Class 2 regional railroad because I like this regional size that's similar in size to Florida East Coast or the Denver and Rio Grande or the Clinchfield. That was the size I really wanted the Seaboard Central to be, but also similar to the Utah Belt. And I thought, well, I'm going to do that. And so I'm going to try to create a believable railroad that would exist between these 2 points and serve customers in between. And so I started that when I was 20 years old in 1990. That's when I decided to come up with the Seaboard Central. And I've started building variations of it. The first, I painted an engine, a couple of engines early on, a Atlas GP38 and an old front range GP9 that I converted to a GP16 that was one of my first kit bash jobs, chopping the nose. And of course it ended up in a scrap box, but I said that engine was scrapped at it early on. But
that's a good way to just incorporate it into the story, right?
Yeah, it actually existed on the railroad. Yeah, it's freelance, but that engine's been scrapped. But anyway, so I've had a number of, since I started the Seaboard Central in 1990, it has its own history because I would do like Eric Bruman and I was keeping everything current. So I kept everything current for a long time until 2015. And then two things happened that made me stop the clock in 2015. One was I had acquired some Athearn boxcars in fallen flag schemes, and I wanted them stenciled for the Alabama and Gulf Railroad, AGR, because I kept seeing these cars everywhere. I thought they were so cool because they were just patched for the AGR. So I sent them off to Bradley DCC, who was doing my DCC installs at the time, and he was great at weathering because he was weathering the locomotives. I said, can you weather some cars for me too? And he did these cars. He patched them and he weathered them.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I've got so much invested in these cars because I had paid for him to do this professional job weathering these cars. And had I kept it current, the real AGR started painting these cars into the mineral red color, the boxcar red that you see, the brown, mineral brown color. And I knew I did not want to do that. I said, no, they'll lose all this character too. And also, in 2015 is when I married my second wife, Katja, who has been a huge supporter of my hobby.
Awesome.
She even wanted to help me do a scene on the layout that this first version of the Seaboard Central before I started this new layout, outdoor wedding scene. We had an outdoor wedding. And I built this laser art, nice Victorian style house, which was the kind of house where we were married, and did a little scene outside. And she wanted to do all the plants and the flowers, and I let her, I bought all the stuff. I said, oh, go to town, see what you can do. And so she has really been a huge supporter of everything I'm doing.
That's awesome.
And big encouragement. And so I'm going to still have a scene like that on the new layout. I just got to get to that point, find a place for it, but we'll do it again.
That's great. It sounds like yet another, your freelance railroad and even the date that you selected are both in my mind's going back to that term of a form of protest, right? You're protesting one is, that, the fact that these lines have all been torn up and turned into rail trails. And, in your world, you can protest that and keep them in business. And then, and I think a lot of guys have been the same way. I've got at least a few that I know. And the first one that comes to mind is Don Iris, who finally, was keeping modern day with Providence and Worcester until the G&W came along with candy corn colors and started spraying them on his locomotives. And he's like, what? That's it. Boom. There it is. This is the end date. We're not going to go any farther. Yep, exactly.
So I settled on the summer of 2015, and I picked the months May, June, July, and August, those 4 months. And I'll go into more detail and tell my audience the reason why, how I'm going to model those 4 months when it comes to operations. But another reason why I, as a real professional railroader, 2015 was the last year before they forced PTC and all these big changes in the rail industry. We have technology has really taken over.
Yeah.
Now you can get on a train, press a button, and it's autopilot. It does it itself. It'll run the train. Will run it all the way until it tells you to take it back over to bring it to a stop. But it'll do everything. It'll even blow the horn. It knows everything. And but that's the day and age we live in. That they can save the most amount of fuel this way. The computer is doing everything these days. So it's taken a lot of the joy out of it, out of running. So that's another reason why I'm on a local.
Yeah.
Where I can do it all myself. But if I was picking another era besides 2015, I would probably pick the late 1990s or early 2000, and I will explain why. I was working at the time, and it was incredibly busy. The railroads were booming. I mean, big time. And this was before PSR, for precision scheduled railroading. And so we operated a lot more trains than we operate now. And we switched a lot more industries than we switch now. And times were great. The housing boom was going on. They were building everywhere they could build. And so the rail industry was just doing so well. We still had brakemen on the jobs, on all the locals. It was a great time to be a railroader at that point in time. If I was going to pick a different time and era, I would probably, and who knows, one day I may downsize the Seaboard Central. We may have to move somewhere else, whatever. If I ever have to build a new layout, I may do that, backdate it to that time between 1995 and 2000, somewhere in that range. Less gang graffiti on cars.
Yeah.
Graffitis can be artistic as well, but lately it's just nothing but gang scribble.
Yeah.
And it's terrible on the cars these days. Where before it wasn't as bad, it was more creative, but now
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to model this particular time period.
Yeah. Graffiti in itself and model railroading is a touchy subject. And there's a lot of, pros and cons of people even saying to model it and not. But yeah, it's tough. And like you said, there's some really cool stuff out there. And, as much as it's illegal and you want to discourage it, it's neat. But yeah, it's gone beyond that.
I do it because I model 2015 and it's on the cars. I can pick and choose what I want to do. But like I said, I can completely understand why people would want to model the 80s or the 70s just to completely avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to the most part.
Yeah.
It wasn't near as how it is today. But yeah, that's so I started this I think the first version of the SC I started around 2013.
So you were sitting on that Seaboard Central idea for quite a while, because you said you came up with that kind of in the 90s, and that was kind of a rolling thing. But
yeah, right. But I mean, the first serious version of the Seaboard Central,
okay,
I believe it was like I'd always had some kind of little switching layout, but never had pinpointed an actual location to try to model.
Okay.
So the first real version, like I call version 1, would be I modeled the town of Griffin, Georgia, and I just picked that particular town because I studied the trackage in that location, and it just fit what I wanted to model. The room size I had, it had the main line split the yard. Had I didn't get to model it faithfully with all the tracks, but I had to leave off one track. But for the most part, I modeled it pretty close. And then I got to include a lot of the industries and it had a lot of really cool industries that was close by. So that was a really fun layout. It was just set too low. I originally intended on making it a double decker, and then I realized I didn't want to do a double deck layout. I was having enough enjoyment out of the single deck that I didn't need a double deck. And I said, wow, it was set at 40 inches, which I guess if you were going to sit in a chair and be a rail fan and just sit around and watch it is a good height. But if you're an operator, and you're standing up and you're following your train, it's too low.
Yeah, my back's starting to get a little sore thinking about that, being down that low and then trying to operate it.
Right. So I knew that was one of those things. If I ever redo this layout or build another layout, I'm going to have to build something higher than that. And so I continued. I call that first version a training layout, where I was practicing and learning new things. And you mentioned I was reluctant about trying for years. I wouldn't think about weathering a car or doing scenery. The scenery I did was very minimal, very minimal. But especially, I was afraid to use an airbrush. I had one. I got one. My wife gave me one for Christmas, but I never used it because I was just afraid I'd mess things up. Especially, so I was sending stuff off, like I've mentioned those cars. I sent things off and had somebody else weather them for me because I was afraid to mess up something I had spent so much money on. So I paid somebody else to do it. And then one day I started watching this weathering series that Mike Confalone did using pan pastels and things like that, artist oils. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to just try it.
Right.
I took some older cars. I knew that if I screwed it up, it was no big loss. And I practiced on them. And I thought, well, this ain't too bad. And I stepped back and looked at it, and I thought, well, that's not bad at all. I think I can do this. And I just kept on and kept on and kept with it. And it got to where I really enjoyed it. And I no longer had to send things off to pay people to weather, because I figured out I could do it myself. And then that led me into let's do scenery. So I started watching videos on people doing scenery, and not just from model railroaders, but on YouTube you can find people doing scenery for the gaming industry.
Yeah.
Right. Or it doesn't have to. They're using the same products. They're just creating a different scene. It's all the same, whether it's a little creek or a river or a wooded area.
Yeah.
And so I was really learning what kind of products they were using, how they were using it, and I realized I can do this. And so I started doing it myself, and I found out I really enjoyed it. And so with that first layout, I learned so many things that I liked and so many things I needed to avoid. And so I said, if I ever built a new layout, I'm going to have to create some kind of method. I started writing things down and said, all right, a process.
Yep.
Step one, I need to do it this way, because we can tend to rush things through and realize, man, I forgot that step. I should have did this before I glued this down or whatever. And so that's the process, what I'm doing. And I'm building this new layout, and it's probably not fast enough for people because most people will build all the bench work first. They've seen the plan the ultimate plan I want to build to take up 3/4 of my basement. And why don't you just build all the bench work and put all the track in before you even do any scenery? And I'm not doing it that way. I'm doing it like one section at a time, and I know it's probably driving people nuts, but I'm doing it. I have a method to my madness, a method to the way I'm doing it, because it's a certain step, the results I'm trying to achieve. And I said, I'm not going to rush myself through it and then end up with problems down the road. If before I ballast the tracks or before I do anything, I'm going to make sure that the equipment runs properly over it. If I need to make a change, now's the time to make a change,
Right. Yeah. And this approach has a name, right? Because I was reading in Tom Kolmoski's blog when he wrote, after seeing your seeing your layout, he mentioned it. So tell us about this approach and where this kind of idea came from, this TOMA, right?
Yeah, the one module approach. I think Joe Fugate with Model Railroad Hobbyist Magazine came up with that idea. And it's a way where you can, like on my original layout, it started out like as a U-shaped layout. And so I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do a scenic section, I'll make it in the middle of the run. So the sections on either side of that scenic section would be more or less the staging areas, and you would run through the scenic section. So that's how I approached it. So this new layout, I looked for a natural starting point that would offer me a lot of operation in a small place, because my goal was to get trains up and running and have, because like I said, I started out as a switching layout all along. I didn't have to have a continuous run.
Right.
And so I took one of the original modules that I removed all the track off from my old layout, and I added the layout legs taller. I made this one at 54 inches high.
Yep.
It's high enough that I can have a little workbench underneath it and weather cars or program locomotives, whatever. This is a 2-foot by 8-foot module that has a large grain elevator on it with a lot of tracks and its own little plant switcher. So this afforded me a chance to get things up and running at an early stage, even if it's just going back and forth just a few feet.
Yeah.
And I just started building the layout from that point. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm connecting the modules as I go along. This way I get to enjoy the layout, and the operations side of it will grow, and it will get more detailed and add a little more complexity as the layout grows. So it's simple right now, but it'll require, right now, one person is fine. I can operate it by myself, but I can operate with 3 people, even on the little small sections I have.
I believe
and
it.
I've done
Yeah.
it. And I've done it.
I think it's a great approach for a couple of reasons that you mentioned. And, and additionally, you don't have a look that when you go down, you're overwhelmed. You're not thinking about all that bench work you built, that all the stuff you have to do ahead of you. You're drilled down and focused on that area and complete it. And you don't have that feeling of, look at all this incomplete stuff. You're looking at what's complete, and then you can add on and add on and add on and keep making those steps. And again, that instant gratification of being able to run a train, be able to keep that flywheel turning and keep it, the momentum going, and that feeling of, of accomplishment going as well.
But for me, the main reason is it avoids burnout.
Yeah.
Because if you are tasked with building all the bench work, laying all the track, and doing all the wiring, and you're doing it which my layout, when it gets finished, will be a large layout, considered a large layout, you could burn out real quickly because you feel pressured about, I've got to get this done. I got to get this done. And with this way, at any point in time, if I need a break from working on the layout, I pick up a throttle and I can have a mini operating session all by myself. And it maybe last 30 minutes, but it's enough to quench that desire, that need, just to, going back to what we talked about before, is it's a stress reliever, just to escape and not think about the other, even building a layout can have its own set of pressure and stress to it. But this way, it's a way to relax. Just take your mind off of it, and maybe you need a break to get that idea of how you're going to solve an issue or whatever, and you can go back to it.
Keeps it from being less like a job, right, and more like a hobby, the way it should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, of course. And one of the things that's kept me motivated also and going is my YouTube channel. Is I try to put out a video every Sunday, and knowing that I've got to come up with a new idea, and what am I going to talk about this week, and how am I going to be able to show some progress of what I've been working on. And that's been a huge motivator. And it's also lets me go back and look and see how much the layout has grown and how much I have grown personally because I can go back and look at some of my really early videos and see, wow, look at what I did back then. It's crazy. And because it's one of those things, the more you do it, the easier things become, or the better you can get at it. You can actually see your own skill levels improve over time if you continue to do it. And I would tell people, don't put things off. Don't wait until you're retired to start a model railroad. Do it, even if it's something small. Even if all you have to work with is just a small shelf layout. Like people, I don't have the space for a model railroad. I didn't have the space, but if all I had was a 6 foot, 1 foot by 6 foot board, I still had something.
Yeah.
You can do something. Build a model, whether an engine, even if it's just to go back and forth, and all you got is one turnout. You can have something, and it is a great way to learn and improve your skills. That's what I like about Lance Mannheim. He explains that in his books.
Yeah, well, we're definitely fans of Lance here, and we're also fans of the one turnout layout and using that as a great starting point. And for a new modeler that's unsure of the hobby or wants to hone their skills, what a great place to start, because you get up and running right away. So you get that gratification of running, but it's a great place to practice scenery techniques and deciding what you want. And as you start to understand your why, and it certainly seems like for you, Tim, you really understand your why through all of this, what you really want to get out of your model railroading projects, and what you want your layout to be, and the things that you really enjoy all tied into this. And especially with the freelance thing where you can kind of create your world.
I have a subscriber that lives in Europe, and he's contacted me and asked a number of questions, and he's doing exactly that. He's building a small diorama layout before he starts his larger layout, just to practice his skills on, and he's doing an excellent job. He showed me just recently he's doing trees, making homemade trees, or hand laying track, something he thought he'd never do, but he's getting to practice on this small diorama, and it's a great way. I highly recommend doing something like that. Great way to learn.
Absolutely. Well, I can't believe it's already been an hour that you and I have been chatting about the Seaboard Central.
Doesn't seem like it, right?
Yeah, it goes by very fast here. But as we wrap up, I definitely wanted to mention, although I don't think you can get your hands on them anymore through the normal means, I wanted to talk about the Home Shops project where you had your Seaboard Central car made by our good friend Chris Palmieri. Tell us a little bit about that project, and then do you think you got something else coming up with him where we could, for those that missed out the first time?
I hope so. That was a great project, and I wanted to. He's helped me out so much, and he actually influenced a change in the look of the Seaboard Central with those cars, and so and he helped me to even come up with more of the backstory of the Seaboard Central, which I thought was excellent. So the Seaboard Centrals went through basically 3 different paint schemes over the course of the year. It started out as a red and gray paint scheme, and then and with the help of Chris and these box cars, we had to come up with a story behind them. And so the box cars represent cars that were acquired in 1995. So I used that because part of the Seaboard Central is the old Georgia Ports Authority Savannah Port Terminal Railroad, and Georgia, and people have probably seen these blue and white box cars, had a white stripe, angled stripe down the side of them.
Yeah,
that said Georgia Ports Authority on them. They've been produced by Athearn and Atlas, I believe, produced them before, and I had some, so I had stenciled them for the Seaboard Central, and I thought, here's a great way to create a new Seaboard Central car. So what we did is we used that paint scheme. In the Georgia Port Authority cars, you can look the flags that's in the white part of the paint job is representing the letter G, P, and A. Well, I got him to represent the letter S and C with the flags.
Okay, so they're like nautical flags or something on the
right.
Well, that's cool.
Right, and so and he helped me with the Seaboard Coastline and design lettering for that, and and I came up with the dock to box service
That's great.
on the cars. Yeah, and because I wanted them to say, all right, well, these are a fleet of cars that are assigned to the Port of Savannah that are loaded with various products coming in, imports, and that gave a reason for them to travel all across the country. So they can start out on the Seaboard Central carrying things like bagged rice or rubber or coffee, whatever kind of products that could come in from South America or Europe, lumber from Europe, or, beans from South America, whatever. And we use those cars, and I hope that we can do another one because maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see if that happens. But I know a lot of people wanted to get their hands on them, and he was shocked to see that they sold that fast. And I was impressed that they did too. And I don't know if it was because of the design, they just look cool, or if it was because of the subscribers that love the Seaboard Central.
I think it's a combination of the two. I think it was a really cool idea, and I love what Chris is doing there, and it's neat that he included you on that. And his mind for freelance railroading is incredible. I love talking with Chris about it, and I'm always excited to see what he's coming out with his next project. So really cool you got to work with him on that, and I look forward to another Seaboard Central car out of Home Shops in the near future, hopefully. And
we just need to keep pressuring Chris to do another Seaboard Central car. So everybody out there, tell Chris, let's do another one.
That's right. It worked with the 50-foot high cubes. I kept saying it, and eventually one showed up. So maybe we'll just keep pressuring him on the Seaboard Central.
And I've told him, hey, Chris, this type of car would work good on the Seaboard Central. If you come up with this car, let's do it.
Yeah, there you go. Keep the ideas flowing into Chris. But Tim, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. It was great getting to know you and the Seaboard Central and hearing your model railroading and railroading story. Put together an awesome career based out of your early childhood love for trains, and definitely a really cool opportunity to hear all of this, and look forward to keeping up with you on the channel. Folks that haven't seen that, youtube.com/Seaboard Central. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. And we'll also put that on the Facebook post. So if you're listening here, go to our Facebook page, Around the Layout Podcast, and you'll be able to see a bunch of pictures of the Seaboard Central and be able to get those links as well. So until the next time we meet up, Tim, thank you again for being on Around the Layout.
All right. Thanks for having me, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.